She had practiced the smile in the mirror for 3 days. Not because smiling was difficult. Vivienne Hartwell had been smiling at people she did not trust since she was 19 years old, and she had become, through necessity and repetition, extremely good at it. The difficulty was not the smile itself. The difficulty was the specific quality of the smile, the one that said, "I have just noticed you for the first time and find you pleasantly surprising," when what it actually said, underneath, in the part of her face she had learned to keep perfectly still, was something else entirely. She practiced until the two were indistinguishable. She fastened her left glove. She fastened her right. She looked at herself in the mirror of the hired rooms on Cavendish Street, the dark hair, the pale face, the grey dress she had chosen because it was unremarkable enough to enter a room without commanding it, and well made enough not to invite pity. She had thought carefully about this dress. She had thought carefully about everything. 2 years of thinking carefully. 2 years of preparation, of letters, of conversations with people who did not know they were being interviewed, of one elderly, stable hand in a village outside Wiltshire, who had been present on a morning in October 1882, and had told no one because no one had thought to ask him correctly. She had asked him correctly. She looked at herself one final time. She thought about Thomas, not the way she usually thought about him now, which was with the controlled and systematic anger of someone who has converted grief into purpose. She thought about him the way she had thought about him before, October 1882. His voice. The particular way he argued not to win, to understand. The way he had looked at her across the breakfast table on ordinary mornings with the expression of a person who is simply glad to be in the room with you. She pressed her hand flat against the dressing table. She breathed. Then she picked up her evening bag, and she went to destroy the Duke of Wrenmore. Before we go any further, this is not the story you think it is. Stay until the very end, because what begins in a ballroom on a Thursday evening in March is not what it appears, and neither is the man at the center of it, and neither, entirely, is she. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Hit the like button. Drop a comment below telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of those actions reaches back to us and matters more than you know. Now, let us go back to Vivienne, because she has walked into the ballroom and the Duke of Wrenmore is exactly where she calculated he would be. And the plan is already in motion. But there is a variable she did not account for, and its name is the truth. Thomas Hartwell had been 26 years old in October of 1882. He was the kind of young man who made rooms feel more inhabited. Not louder, not more dramatic, simply more alive. In the way that certain people make things more alive by being genuinely present in them rather than performing presence. He was Vivienne's younger brother by 2 years, and her closest person by every measure that mattered. He had her father's warmth and her mother's precision, and something of his own that was entirely Thomas, a particular quality of generous attention, of taking people seriously, of finding most human beings more interesting than society typically encouraged him to find them. He had gone to the Wrenmore card party on a Thursday evening in October because a friend had invited him, and he had no reason not to go. He had played cards. He had drunk moderately. He had said something the accounts varied on precisely what that had been received poorly by the Duke of Wrenmore. This was, as Vivienne had come to understand over 2 years of careful investigation, the beginning of the manufactured sequence. The man she had not yet named she would name him was Lord Gerald Petch. He was a man of 40 with significant debts and a specific debt to the Duke of Wrenmore that had become, by October 1882, unmanageable. He had spent 3 weeks before the card party identifying the instrument he needed. He had identified Thomas Hartwell young, principled, likely to react honestly to provocation, unlikely to back down from a challenge once issued as the instrument. He had arranged the card party. He had arranged the seating. He had arranged the particular sequence of events that led, by 11 o'clock that evening, to words being exchanged between Thomas Hartwell and the Duke of Wrenmore that neither of them had entirely chosen. The duel had happened at dawn. A field outside the city. 4 witnesses, 2 for each party. One of the Duke's witnesses was Petch himself. The other was a man whose name Vivienne had not been able to fully verify. Thomas's witnesses were his friend Alec and a man named Carlyle, who had emigrated to Canada by the time Vivienne began her investigation. Thomas had been shot in the shoulder. The shot had not been immediately fatal. He had been carried home. He had developed a fever on the 3rd day. He had died on the 6th. Vivienne had been at his bedside for all 6 days. She had held his hand on the last morning. She had watched his face at the precise moment it became something other than Thomas, and she had sat with that for a very long time before she stood up and began to think about what came next. What came next was the inquest. The Duke of Wrenmore's testimony had been delivered with the composed and entirely confident authority of a man who had constructed his account with care and delivered it without hesitation. He described the card game. He described the exchange of words framed carefully as mutual, as escalating, as the regrettable but entirely voluntary progress of 2 men toward an inevitable conclusion. He described the duel itself as conducted with full propriety. He expressed appropriate regret for the outcome. He was believed immediately and completely because he was the Duke of Wrenmore and Thomas Hartwell was a solicitor's son from Hampshire, and the architecture of that difference did not require explanation in a Victorian courtroom. The coroner recorded a verdict of misadventure. Vivienne had sat in the public gallery and listened to this, and had kept her face entirely still, and her hands folded in her lap, and her breathing even. Her mother, beside her, had made a sound single, small, involuntary. The sound of a woman hearing her son's death officially assigned a meaning that erased what it actually was. Vivienne had taken her mother's hand. She had not looked away from the Duke's face. She had begun, in that moment, to plan. 2 years. The stable hand's name was Henry Marsh. He had been employed at the Wrenmore estate in 1882 and had been present at the duel field at dawn, not as a witness, as the man who had brought the horses. He had seen things. He had heard things. He had told no one because he was a man of 60 with a position he needed and a family he was responsible for and no mechanism for speaking truth to a duke without destroying himself in the process. Vivienne had found him through the estate records. She had driven to his cottage on a Tuesday afternoon and sat at his kitchen table and drunk his wife's tea and asked him to tell her what he had seen. She had told him who she was. She had told him what she intended to do with what he told her. She had told him that she would not use his name publicly without his consent. He had looked at her for a long time. Then he had gone to a box on the shelf above the fireplace and he had taken out a letter. He had held it for a moment. Then he had handed it to her. The letter was in the Duke's hand. Written the morning after the duel. Addressed to no one. A private document. Never sent. The kind of thing a man writes when he needs to put the true version of something somewhere outside himself because carrying it alone is becoming unmanageable. It described what had actually happened at the card party. It described Petch's orchestration, the seating, the sequence, the specific words Petch had fed the Duke that evening that had been designed to produce exactly the response they produced. It described the Duke's understanding, arriving too late, that he had been used. It described his testimony at the inquest and the reason for it. Petch had visited him the night before the inquest. Petch had made clear that if the Duke's testimony deviated from the agreed account, certain information would reach Vivienne's mother and sisters. Certain financial information. Certain social information. The kind of information that does not destroy a duke, but destroys the women of a solicitor's family completely and permanently. The Duke had given his testimony. He had protected the Hartwells by destroying their ability to seek justice. He had done this with the particular blindness of a man who believed that protection meant silence, and had not understood what the silence was costing the people it was meant to protect. Vivienne had read the letter 3 times at Henry Marsh's kitchen table. She had folded it carefully. She had placed it in her bag. She had thanked Henry Marsh and his wife. She had driven back to London. She had sat in her hired rooms on Cavendish Street for 2 days, thinking about the letter. Then she had put on the grey dress and fastened her gloves and gone to the Forsyth ball where the Duke of Wrenmore would be present, and she had walked in with her plan intact and the letter in a locked box under her bed and a variable she had not yet encountered and could not have prepared for. He was standing near the far window when she first saw him. She had expected, she had prepared for a man whose appearance matched her construction of him. 2 years of controlled anger produce a very specific image, and she had been living inside that image for long enough that it had acquired the solidity of fact. Cold, calculating, the easy authority of someone who has never had to consider the cost of his decisions to anyone beneath him. What she saw was different. He was talking to an elderly gentleman, with the patient attention of someone who is genuinely engaged rather than performing engagement. He was not working the room. He was not performing himself for the social occasion. He was simply present in it, contained, quiet, slightly apart from the noise of it in the way that certain people are apart from noise without removing themselves from the room. He was not what she had built. She adjusted. She was good at adjusting. She found her introduction, the mutual acquaintance, Mrs. Forsyth's niece, who had been cultivated for exactly this purpose over the preceding 3 weeks. The introduction was made. The Duke looked at her with the grey eyes she had not expected, not cold, not calculating, simply attentive in the way of someone who is actually looking at the person in front of them. She deployed the smile. He did not respond to the smile the way men typically responded to it. He did not become warmer or more expansive or more interested in his own impression. He simply continued looking at her with the same quality of attention and said, "Miss Hartwell, I believe you are acquainted with the Forsyth family through the Hampshire connection?" "My mother's side," she said. "I knew Hampshire once," he said. Some years ago, something moved in her that she controlled immediately and completely. "It is a pleasant county," she said. "Yes," he said. "I found it so." He moved on. She watched him go. She stood with her champagne and her smile and the plan entirely intact and the variable she had not yet named, doing something quiet and persistent at the edge of her thinking that she did not permit herself to examine. She saw him 4 times in the first week. Each meeting engineered. She was very good at engineering, but each conversation less engineered than the one before because he was the kind of man who moved conversations in directions you had not intended and did it without appearing to try. He asked questions. Not the social questions, not the questions about family connections and county associations and the season's engagements. Questions about what she thought, about a legal case reported in the Times that week, about whether she believed that the current inheritance laws served any legitimate social purpose or simply entrenched existing advantage. He asked this last question at a dinner party in the 2nd week with the direct and genuinely curious attention of a man who wants to know what the person across from him actually thinks. She told him what she actually thought. This was a tactical error, and she knew it, and she made it anyway because the question was too precise to answer imprecisely, and she was not, at a fundamental level, a person who could be imprecise about things that mattered when directly asked. He listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You have read Blackstone." "My father's copy," she said. "He was a solicitor." "Was?" he said. "He died when I was 17. He was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry," he said. "Not the social sorry, the real one. The one that does not require a response." She looked at him across the dinner table and felt the variable doing something she could no longer pretend not to notice. She went home that evening and sat with the locked box for a long time. She did not open it. She went to bed. She did not sleep easily. By the 3rd week, she had stopped pretending the variable was manageable and started pretending it was irrelevant. This was less effective, but it was what she had available. He had begun seeking her out, rather than waiting to be found. This was not supposed to happen, she had planned, to control the pace, to manage the proximity, to produce the impression of organic connection while maintaining the architecture of intention underneath it. But he was not a man who was managed, and she had understood this too late. He moved toward her with the direct and unhurried certainty of a man who has decided something and does not require anyone's permission to act on it. They walked in Hyde Park on a Tuesday afternoon. She had not engineered this. He had asked, and she had said yes, because saying no would have been suspicious, and not because she had wanted to say yes with a force that frightened her slightly. They talked about Thomas. Not directly. She did not say his name, but she talked about grief, about what it did to a family. about the particular damage of a public loss versus a private one, about the way certain kinds of loss do not announce themselves at first and arrive fully later when you are least prepared for them. She talked about this with more honesty than she had intended, because he was listening with the quality of attention that made honesty feel like the only available response. He was very quiet for a long time after she finished. "I have a grief of that kind," he said. "Something I did, something I failed to do, that arrived fully later than it should have, that I have been carrying since October of 1882. She kept her pace exactly even. She kept her face exactly still. October 1882. Grief of that kind is the hardest," she said carefully. "Yes," he said. "It is." They walked in silence for a while. The park was cold and pale around them. She was aware of him beside her with the particular acute awareness of someone who is trying very hard not to be aware of something. She was in love with him. She had been in love with him for at least a week and had been refusing to use the word for that long and could no longer refuse it because the word was simply accurate and she was a person who dealt in accuracy. She was in love with the man who had been responsible for her brother's death, and she had the letter in a locked box under her bed, and she did not know what to do with any of it. She found him alone in the Forsyth Library on a Friday evening in the 5th week. She had not planned this. She had gone to find a moment of quiet, and he had been there already, standing at the window with a glass he had not touched, looking out at the dark garden with the expression of a man who is not seeing what he is looking at. She stood in the doorway. He turned. They looked at each other across the library. The fire was low. The room was very quiet. She had made her decision on the walk back from Hyde Park on Tuesday. She had spent 3 days being certain of it, and 1 day trying to be uncertain, and 2 more being certain again. It was the only honest available approach, and she was a person who dealt in honesty even when honesty was the most difficult thing in the room. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to let me finish before you speak." He set down his glass. He turned fully toward her. He waited. "My name is Vivienne Hartwell," she said. "Thomas Hartwell was my brother. He died in November of 1882 from injuries sustained in a duel. I came to London this season to find evidence against you. I engineered our introduction. Every meeting for the first 2 weeks was deliberate." She paused. "I have a letter, written in your hand, the morning after the duel. I obtained it from Henry Marsh." The room was completely silent. His face went through several things. She watched all of them. She had watched his face for 5 weeks, with the careful, systematic attention of someone building a case, and she knew its vocabulary by now. She knew what it looked like when he was composing himself, and she knew what it looked like when he was not. This was the second one. Something moved across it that was not surprise, not guilt-managed, something older, something that had been waiting. "Miss Hartwell," he said, very quietly. "Let me finish," she said. He waited. "I have read the letter," she said. "All of it. I know about Petch. I know what he told you the night before the inquest. I know why you gave the testimony you gave." She looked at him steadily. "I came here to destroy you. I am telling you this because I am no longer able to do it without telling you first, and because what I intend to do now is not what I came here to do." He was very still. "What do you intend to do now?" he said. "I intend to use the letter and Henry Marsh's account to expose Petch," she said. "Not you, the man who actually killed my brother." A long silence. "You came to destroy me," he said. "Yes, and now you are not." "No." "Why?" he said. "Not suspicion. Genuine question. The question of a man who needs to understand the answer precisely." She looked at him across the library. The fire, the dark window, the untouched glass on the table beside him. "Because the letter tells me what happened," she said. "And because I have been paying attention for 5 weeks." A pause. "And because Thomas would have wanted the right person to fall." He looked at her for a very long time. Then he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to let me finish." She waited. He told her everything. Not the letter's version, his version. The card party, the sequence, The moment he had understood too late what Petch had done. The duel. Thomas. He was brave, he said, quietly, in the particular way of someone who does not know how to be otherwise. I have thought about that every day since. The testimony. Petch's threat. The calculation he had made, the wrong calculation. The one that had traded justice for what he believed was protection, and had not been protection at all. I did not know how to correct it, he said. After the inquest, I told myself that speaking would cause more damage than silence. I told myself that every year for 2 years, and I have believed it less each time. He looked at her. I am sorry, he said. For Thomas. For what my silence cost your family. For all of it. She looked at him. This man who had been carrying October 1882 from the other side of it. The same weight, differently distributed. The same grief, differently shaped. She did not say it was all right. It was not all right. Thomas was dead, and had been dead for 2 years, and no amount of correct information changed that. I know, she said simply. Lord Gerald Petch was exposed at the April County Assembly. Vivienne presented the evidence, the letter, Henry Marsh's sworn testimony, the documented sequence of the card party's arrangement, the financial records showing the debt Petch owed the Duke. She presented it with the precise and unhurried competence of a woman who has been building this case for 2 years and has finally found the correct target for it. The Duke stood beside her and gave his corrected testimony. At considerable personal cost, there were consequences, social and professional, for a man who admits his inquest testimony was incomplete. He accepted them without negotiation. This was, Vivienne thought, the most honest thing she had watched anyone do. Petch's social standing collapsed publicly and completely in the particular way of things that have been built on concealment and meet the light. He left London within the fortnight. The legal proceedings that followed were thorough and extended, and concluded in a manner that satisfied Vivienne's solicitor enormously. Thomas's death was formally reconsidered. The record was corrected. Vivienne's mother received a letter from the coroner's office not adequate. Nothing was adequate, but real acknowledging the original verdict's insufficiency. She read it at the kitchen table of the Hampshire house and wept with the particular quality of someone who has been waiting a long time for a single true thing and has finally received it. Vivienne and Callum did not resolve things quickly. She had come to destroy him. He had failed her brother through a silence he had told himself was protection. These were not small things, and neither of them was the kind of person who treated large things as small ones. They were honest with each other. This was, it turned out, the most difficult and the most essential thing, the particular honesty of 2 precise people who have both been paying full attention and cannot pretend otherwise. They argued. They disagreed about what silence as protection actually cost. They agreed, eventually, and with considerable work, on most of the things that mattered. He proposed on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 1 year after the assembly, 2 years after Henry Marsh's kitchen table, 3 years after the morning that had changed everything. He did not make a performance of it. He simply told her that he had been paying attention since a ballroom in March, and that he intended to keep paying attention for the remainder of the available time, and that he would like her permission to do that correctly. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the mirror on Cavendish Street, the practiced smile, the grey dress, the plan she had walked into a ballroom to execute. She thought about Thomas, not the controlled and systematic anger, not the grief converted to purpose. Thomas at the breakfast table. His voice. The particular way he argued not to win, but to understand. She thought he would have found this entire situation entirely characteristic of her and would have had several precise and affectionate things to say about it. Yes, she said. They were married in December. Small, deliberate, honest, the only way either of them knew how to do things. Henry Marsh attended. He sat in the second row with his wife and wept openly and was entirely unembarrassed about it. Vivienne caught his eye during the vows and nodded once, the small, precise nod of 2 people who understand what they have built together and do not need to announce it. Vivienne's mother attended. She sat in the front row with her younger daughters, and she looked at Callum Ashford with the careful, assessing attention of a woman who has very good reasons to withhold trust and has decided, after considerable examination, to extend it. Anyway, he had gone to Hampshire in September specifically to sit at her kitchen table and tell her what had happened and what he had done and what he had failed to do. He had done this without Vivienne's knowledge. She had found out afterward, from her mother's letter. He had not mentioned it. She had asked him why. "Because it was between your mother and me," he said. It did not require an audience. She had looked at him for a long moment. "You are," she said, "an extremely difficult person to have planned to destroy." He looked at something that was not quite a smile. "You are," he said, "an extremely effective person to have been destroyed by." Thomas Hartwell's name was placed on a proper record in the Hampshire Parish Church in the spring following the wedding. Not a grand gesture. A small brass plate, accurately inscribed, his dates and his name, and a single line that Vivienne had written herself. He argued not to win, but to understand. She had stood in the church alone for a while after it was installed. She had looked at it. She had talked to him quietly, in the way she had talked to him in her mind for 3 years, the running conversation that grief produces with the people it removes. She told him how it had ended. All of it. The ballroom, the grey dress, the plan, the letter, the variable she had not accounted for. She told him she thought he would have liked Callum Ashford. After a suitable period of principled suspicion, she told him she was all right. Outside the church, the spring morning was ordinary and indifferent and entirely itself. She stood in it for a while. Then she went home. Thank you for staying to the very end. If this story moved something in you, if Vivienne's choice in that library stayed with you, if the image of a woman who came to destroy a man and found the truth instead meant something, then please do one thing right now. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Not a casual forward, a deliberate share, to someone who needs to be reminded that the truth, found late, is still the truth. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you are watching from. Every single one of you matters to this library. Until next time, the doors are always open.